This episode contains material that might be triggering for some. If you need to stop the podcast at any time to take care of yourself, please do so.
If you need support, you can call the 24/7 National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And welcome to our monthly episode for July. I can't believe it's July.
I know this year seems to be passing actually faster than last year, which I didn't think was possible.
Oh, last year dragged for me. I felt like last year was forever.
Interminable. I feel like somehow it was simultaneously both, which helped to balance it out. And this year is just fast. I really hope that it's not setting a precedent for next year to feel faster than this year, because I can't handle that. But
I know. Very quick. Yeah, I can't believe we're here already to the end of July. It's pretty wild.
I need years to exist.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. But basically, for what we're here to talk about today, Kate and I commonly, I feel like in groups that we lead, or we'll get emails from people, or people will post in the Facebook group. A lot of times people have questions about how can DBT help them with trauma that they've experienced in their lives. And so we thought we'd do an episode today all about DBT and PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. This may feel a little bit similar to one of the monthly episodes we did months ago now. I think it might have been our first monthly episode.
Yeah, something like that, early.
Yeah, it was a while back where basically we went through the criteria for borderline personality disorder, and we talked about what DBT skills can help with which criteria. And we're basically going to do that exact same thing today, but we're just going to do it with the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. So a couple disclaimers that are really important here. The first thing that feels important to say and to name is that DBT was not designed to treat trauma. So when it comes to us talking about PTSD and how DBT can help with this, you'll see as we go along, we definitely think that there are some symptoms of PTSD that DBT can really help alleviate, potentially. And also, DBT is not the trauma treatment of choice, you could say. There are many other forms of therapy out there that are designed to treat trauma, and they might do a better job of treating trauma than DBT does. So that feels important to point out there. Not that DBT can't help, but it can only do so much.
It can only do what it does.
Its purpose. Yeah, exactly. The other thing that we said in the episode where we talked about borderline personality disorder, and it is worth saying again, as we're going through the criteria today, you might be thinking to yourself as you listen, hey, I checked that box, I checked that box. Ooh, that sounds like me. Hey, maybe I have PTSD. And do not diagnose yourself. If you are resonating with some of the things that we're talking about today, if you don't already have a therapist, seeking out a therapist and talking about it with them can be a good route to go, because we do not want you guys diagnosing yourselves. Even if some of this does hit home for you, it doesn't necessarily mean you meet full criteria for PTSD. Also, this is kind of a bonus disclaimer that feels important to say about that one. Kate and I are not reading all of the criteria for PTSD today from the book called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. We are not reading it verbatim, and we are not reading, how do I want to put this? There are some other things that come before and after the meat of what we are reading. So this is primarily an episode about DBT, and we're going to be focusing on, again, some of the PTSD criteria and how DBT can help with that. But we are not reading the DSM verbatim. So even if you're like, I'm checking all these boxes, well, there are some boxes that we're not even touching on today with PTSD, because it gets really in depth and really complex, and we want to be mindful of time. So I am going to be posting links in the Facebook group with like the link that Kate and I are using today that kind of summarizes the criteria for PTSD, and a link that does have it verbatim more in depth. We are going to post those links, but don't diagnose yourself. That's the heart and soul of this. We are skimming through what PTSD is today. It's pretty complicated. Like with BPD, there's just 9 criteria, and it's like, check 5 of these boxes. Basically, PTSD is a lot more in depth. You have to experience these criteria for a certain amount of time. It's just more complicated. So don't diagnose yourself. I think I've said it like 3 or 4 times now, so I won't keep repeating it. That's all I want to say. Kate, I'll turn it over to you next.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would append onto yours was just that, as you mentioned, we're not reading out of the DSM, and so the verbiage that we're going to be using today is just a little bit more, layperson friendly. Right? It's
easily understandable.
Exactly, yeah. It's a bit of a summary and a bit of a, more digestible format than the exact wording. So, again, if anybody, because I know we have other therapists, etc., that listen also are like, that's not how it's worded. We know. So
we're boiling it down.
We are boiling it down. Very good. I like that way of putting it. So, let's start off. The first criteria is you have to have experienced what they describe as a stressor. So this says that the person was exposed to death, threatened death, actual or threatened serious injury, or actual or threatened sexual violence in one of the following ways. Either direct exposure, so it happened to you, witnessing the trauma, so you saw it happen to another person, learning that it happened to a relative or close friend, or indirect exposure to details of the trauma, usually in the course of professional duties. So they list things like first responders and medics. I would say that sometimes people in our profession could also count in here.
Journalists.
Yeah, there's all sorts of different ways that this could go, right? So that's how they, lay it out. One of the things that I think is really important to lean into here is to explain the difference between what we as therapists commonly refer to as big T and little t traumas. For it to count for PTSD, it has to be a big T trauma, which they did a really good job of laying out when they described the criteria, right? Death, serious injury, sexual assault, either the reality thereof or the threat thereof. Now, a lot of people would say, hey, I've been through trauma and I haven't been through any of those things. What gives? It's probably a little T trauma. This is not to say it isn't trauma. It's not to say that it doesn't affect you profoundly and deeply on an emotional level. It's not to say that it can't have an intense impact on your mental health and well-being. It just means that it isn't the criteria for this particular diagnosis. So little T traumas could be things like a divorce, could be things like emotional or verbal abuse in the context of either a romantic relationship or a parent-child relationship, things like that. Bullying could count as little T trauma. Gosh, I don't know, Michelle, do you have other ideas off the top of your head? There's so many.
Just thinking personally about what we've shared on the podcast. Like you learning that you are sterile, that would be a little T trauma. I've experienced a miscarriage. That would be a little T trauma.
Right. So these are profound events in people's lives, right? This is not in any way to diminish them. And they don't count for this particular diagnostic criteria. So Please don't use the fact that you don't meet the criteria for big T trauma as a way to diminish, put down, or devalue what you've actually gone through. Just recognize that there's a difference between these things. Maybe not everyone, but a huge quantity of humans have been through some number of little T traumas over the course of their life. And thankfully, many fewer people than that have gone through big T traumas. And so we just needed a way to sort through the people, who fall into one category or the other. So, big T traumas, scary, horrible, awful things. And you have to have gone through one, sadly. To even start, that's the first one. If you haven't gone through a big T trauma, the PTSD diagnosis is just off the table. Not even up there for consideration. And so we just needed a way to sort through those.
Yep. Totally. And also along with that, though, with some of the things that we're about to get into with how PTSD can show up, even if, like you're just saying, Kate, even if you're like, oh, I haven't experienced, the risk of serious bodily injury, or, I haven't experienced sexual assault or that kind of a thing. So, yep, I don't check that box, quote unquote. You still may experience some of the things that we're talking about today, but it's exactly like you're talking about. You won't qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD. So
we do sort of hope that maybe it might expand to include some more stuff in the future, but this is this is the state of things right now.
Yep, exactly. Yep. So some of this may still be helpful for you if you do experience some of these things, even if it's not under the umbrella of a PTSD diagnosis. So diving into what those things are, the way that the PTSD diagnosis is divided is into like these different chunks. They label them like Kate just talked about. Chunk A is basically what they call it, right? Like defining what the trauma is. And then there's B, C, D, E, and so on. So I'm talking about the next chunk of things that people can experience. So this could be experiencing unwanted, upsetting memories, nightmares, flashbacks, emotional distress after exposure to a traumatic reminder, physical reactivity after exposure to a traumatic reminder. So that's how many things? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Five different things.
Under like intrusive symptoms, right? Like that's what that chunk is labeled.
Yes, exactly. That's what that chunk is labeled. So one of the things that I will point out here, that's a common question I get because it mentions the term flashbacks. And a lot of times clients will ask me, what's the difference between a memory and a flashback? And I don't have like a textbook definition in front of me. This is just how I kind of describe it for clients in case you're listening and wondering the same thing. Is that a memory is that you are essentially grounded in the present and you're thinking about something that happened in the past. So maybe, not if you're Kate, because Kate can't see images in her mind, but you might be kind of seeing an image in your mind's eye of what happened during that event that you're remembering. But that's about all it is. It's just an image in your mind that you're thinking of. A flashback can be much more intense and normally can involve a lot of your other senses. So rather than just kind of having a visual image in your mind's eye of what was happening, you may vividly recall the sounds that you were hearing at that time. You may start to have a physical sensation like you did then. So your heart may start beating faster. You may start sweating. If physical pain was involved, you may start re-experiencing what that physical pain was like. So it's almost a feeling like you are re-experiencing or living in that memory. So it's much more intense than just thinking about what happened, say, 10 years ago. It really feels like you're reliving it in a very bodily way when you're experiencing a flashback. So that's what that's talking about. Most of the other things I think make sense. Again, the physical reactivity after exposure to a traumatic reminder can show up in some of those ways as well. You may just notice that for the rest of the day, you feel really anxious and really jittery and really on edge. And that would be physical reactivity after you've been exposed to something that reminds you of the trauma. So how can DBT help with some of these things? The thing that seemed most obvious to me and stood out is when it comes to nightmares. DBT has what they call a nightmare protocol. We have this already posted in the Facebook group. Kate, maybe you can remember. I think we did talk about this a little bit in our sleep episode.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we did.
We must have gone into it a little bit when we were talking about that. So they list out step-by-step ways to try to manage nightmares, especially, which is pretty common with trauma, if you're having the same recurring nightmare on a regular basis. So, the same thing is happening every time that you're having this nightmare. Nightmare protocol can be really helpful for that. With the stuff about after exposure, right? So they're talking about how after you're exposed to something that just reminded you of the trauma, you may experience emotional distress and or experience physical reactivity. Oh, I just think that is such a good opportunity to use self-soothe. The thing about traumatic reminders, sometimes you might be able to anticipate them. Sometimes you may not. Sometimes you may be very blindsided. Exactly. And either way, even if you're like, okay, today I know that I'm going to this place. I know that this place reminds me of the trauma I've been through, and that's going to be hard for me, and you can kind of prepare to self-soothe after that. I honestly think that self-soothing can be super important for those caught off guard moments too, when it's like, once you do get back home, once you are, back in a place where you can self-soothe, please do it. Please do something to take care of yourself. And that may mean postponing some of the other things that you were going to do that day. Okay, so the house isn't getting cleaned now, or I'm canceling those plans with a friend, or whatever it is to make the space for self-soothing. That's going to serve you better than pretending like everything's fine. Like, create a little bit of space to self-soothe, if nothing else, after you've been exposed to something that reminds you of the trauma. With those things that I was just talking about how sometimes you might be able to anticipate or know that you are going to be exposed to a reminder. Cope ahead or effective rethinking and paired relaxation, I think, can both be really helpful, just depending on what kind of flavor of each of those fits for you and how often you might be encountering this traumatic reminder. And this is going to vary. Some people, they experience a traumatic event in a certain place and they never have to ever go to that place again. Or they never see anybody who is associated with the person who traumatized them, or what have you. Some people have very little exposure to reminders, and some people have daily exposure to reminders. And if you are aware that you are going to be exposed to something on a regular basis that reminds you of your trauma, I think Cope Ahead or effective rethinking and paired relaxation can really help with that, so that hopefully after that exposure, you're not having as much emotional distress, or you're not having as much physical reactivity, if you're going into it from this place of feeling as prepared and as calm as possible. That, I think, can be really important in a way that DBT can help there. So, yeah.
I like it.
Thanks.
I think those make a lot of sense. All right, let's see. On to the next chunk, as you put it.
The next chunk. Yeah, I don't know. They call it criterion. It seems so fancy.
It just cracks me up. Anyway, so the next chunk is related to avoidance. So it talks about avoidance of trauma-related stimuli after the trauma in the following ways. So you're either avoiding trauma-related thoughts or feelings, or you're avoiding trauma-related external reminders. Right? And so this Oh my goodness, this can look so many different ways, right? Michelle said, I don't know, there's someone at work or something like that that reminds you of someone that traumatized you, right? So that you might want to avoid going to work. Or there's something happened outside a grocery store, so you want to stop grocery shopping. You don't want to go there anymore, right? So these are sort of external things. Or you just don't want to be in a place that brings up memories, right? So it's not necessarily a stimulus, but these topics, this song, these I don't know, just anything that might bring up emotions or thoughts that were related to the trauma. And I know this sounds vague because it is.
Because it can take so many different forms.
Yeah. It's going to be unique to you and to your trauma. And so they do just sort of have to shovel it broadly into these two categories. And then, a trained professional can help you figure out, what that looks like specifically for you, if it's applicable. How can DBT help with this one? This one is tricky, honestly. So Michelle and I were both talking about trying to find as many things as we could, and this one was a bit harder. The first thing that came up to us was check the facts, right? Right, so this, I don't know, I'm going to go with the trauma happened outside of a grocery store, so I don't want to grocery shop anymore, right? Well, run that through, check the facts. Was the thing that happened to you actually tied to it being near a grocery store? Or could it have happened in any public parking lot of any sort or something like that, right? Try and really look at your thoughts, look at your assumptions, look at why that stimulus is coming up for you as being related to the trauma, and see if check the facts can help you disentangle those things, right? Okay, no, it wasn't that, it was a grocery store. It was, happened for these other reasons, and the grocery store was, not a part of it. It just happened to be there, right? And that might help you with regrounding yourself back in, what is real here and now, right? Not necessarily, your trauma was very real, right? Not to in any way poo-poo that. But is it actually related to the things that you're relating it to? Or is your brain trying to tie it into as many things as it can to try and keep you safe, right? This is a lot of how we respond.
Do.
Yeah, exactly. That's a lot of the things that we consider PTSD are our brains just really trying very hard to help us not go through that again. And so it's all right, I don't know exactly why this happened here, but let's see. This was at night, so don't go outside at night anymore. This was in front of a grocery store, don't go to grocery stores anymore. This, happened, there was a guy involved, stay away from all men. This is what it will just cast a very wide net in an attempt to catch all things that could possibly lead to that situation happening again. Right? So your brain's technically doing its job. Right? It is. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's just perhaps overambitious. And so it can cast too wide of a net. And I think in those instances, check the facts could help you see where your brain has sort of overstepped reality in its real intense desire to protect you. Right, so check the facts is one thing that I think could be really helpful in sorting through where your brain is being helpful and where your brain is being too helpful, if that makes sense. And in the cases where it's being too helpful, I think pairing check the facts with opposite action, right? Almost certainly opposite action to fear. Right, so I know that those are, or I'm pretty damn sure those are in the guides if you need to look at the opposite action sheets to see what exactly opposite action to fear is. But broadly speaking, it's just about approaching the thing that you're afraid of, right? So in this case, it might be grocery shopping, even though grocery shopping is terrifying, to help yourself, again, see that nothing bad happens, right? Even when you go and do the scary thing. Now, opposite action may not always be needed or appropriate. Right? This is something to really consider. Don't assume that just because something is related to your trauma, that it should just get tossed out the window, and you should always act opposite to those urges. Avoiding all grocery stores, probably not a great idea. But I'm having a hard time just coming up with things on the fly. There may be things about the situation that where your trauma took place that it actually makes good sense to avoid those things.
Right. that are actually unsafe.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I don't know about you, Kate, but I do see this happen sometimes with my clients.
Oh, sure.
Is that basically they go through a traumatic experience, and then almost as a way to sort of rewrite the story or to take back control or whatever it may be, they start putting themselves in situations that are similar to the trauma, trying to get a different ending.
Outcome.
And yep, exactly. And sometimes they do wind up proving to themselves, okay, yes, I can do this, and look, I escape and I'm okay this time. But sometimes these are really risky, dangerous situations, and sometimes people do then have another trauma occur, because if you were to really check the facts of the situation, it would be like, oh yeah, don't go back to that place, or don't be around those people again, or
or don't engage
this
in that
would
activity,
not be safe.
Yep.
Yes. But yeah, like
Right,
you're saying, grocery stores, hopefully pretty benign.
Exactly. No, absolutely. I've definitely seen clients do that, and with results like you were talking about, right? So, I know Michelle and I have harped on this on the past, but it bears repeating. Check the facts isn't just to invalidate yourself, right? That's not the point. It's not meant to invalidate yourself at all, right? It is to check, see what is factual and what is not. And sometimes you may realize that your fear is based in fact, and opposite action would not be appropriate. So, check the facts to help sort things into their appropriate piles, and opposite action, if the pile that it falls under is the one that's probably not an actual threat, right? Probably not actually dangerous. And if you're having a hard time sorting through those, I think this probably goes with all of the things that Michelle and I are going to talk about today. But, consulting with your therapist, being like, I think, I worked through this and I think this falls under this category. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What am I missing, if anything? It can't. Nah, that's too strong of a word. It can often be beneficial to rope in another brain of someone that you trust. To give it another gander.
Yeah. And this is where I also think that DBT is a good starting place.
Yeah.
But DBT is not going to be the whole equation here. I think especially with this section, because even if, let's say, you do check the facts and you realize, okay, I recognize, a common example I think of is people who have been in car accidents, which can fall under the trauma criteria like Kate talked about. If you were in a terrible car accident and experienced serious bodily injury, that classifies. And so, then sometimes people are like, I'm never driving again. And even if you check the facts, and even if you're like, okay, I drove for X number of years before I got in this car accident, I can probably drive again and not be doomed to get in a car accident the next time I get in a vehicle. You can do all of that. I also don't know if I would recommend okay, great, so I'm going to practice opposite action and get in the car tomorrow and go for a drive. You're probably not fully ready, if that makes sense. There's probably some other stuff that you're going to need to do to get ready for that moment, because we don't want you to say, get behind the wheel, and then you start going, and then you realize, oh crap, no, I'm not ready for this, right? Or people will, they'll be like, okay, so I'm going to go back to the grocery store. And then they have a complete panic attack the moment they walk in the door. So are you doing check the facts? Are you doing opposite action? Yes. And also when it comes to these trauma events, yeah, you really want to make sure that a therapist is helping set you up for success, because there's probably going to be a lot that you need to do within yourself in between checking the facts and then actually acting opposite and doing the thing to get you ready for that. don't necessarily go it alone.
No, I mean, yeah, anybody who has access to it, if you've been through a trauma, getting professional assistance in that healing process, I think makes a lot of sense. Not quite, I don't know how to put that, because some people don't have access to it, so it's not quite right to say that it's necessary, but it's a big boon, and really helpful. To get someone to help guide you through that process. As I like how you put it, Michelle, set you up for success, because having it go horribly could just add to the trauma and make it harder to reapproach later.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so moving on to the next one, which is section D, chunk D. They labeled this section negative alterations in cognitions and mood. What do we mean by that? Basically what it means is you're overall thinking pretty negatively and feeling pretty shitty. If I ultimately had to boil that down into to layman's terms. Because after you go through a trauma, it changes the way you think about things. It changes the way you view the world. And it changes the way that you're going to feel emotionally on a daily basis. It just does. So there's lots of things that fall under this category. One of them is inability to recall key features of the trauma. The next says overly negative thoughts and assumptions about oneself and the world. Exaggerated blame of self or others for causing the trauma. Negative affect, decreased interest in activities, feeling isolated, and difficulty experiencing positive affect. So where do I start with that?
I'm looking at this, you got some of the longer ones.
Yeah, and I really want to make sure that we're explaining kind of what each of those means. So if we start with the inability to recall key features of the trauma, Kay and I'm pretty sure we've touched on this before, just because we talk about neuroscience a fair amount on the podcast. But essentially, you will, maybe you personally have experienced this, or people in your life have experienced this who they went through a really traumatic event and they either only remember bits and pieces of it, or they don't remember it. They know it happened because maybe, again, it resulted in some serious bodily injury to them, or people have told them who witnessed it, this is what happened to you, but they don't remember either some or all of the trauma. And sometimes people are like, well, how does that happen?
Remember it out of sequence, which really fucks with people.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, so the memory can just get really scrambled when it comes to recalling trauma. And essentially, if I really had to boil it down and not go too in depth as to why that happens, when it comes to memories, we all have different types of memories. I actually really like how the movie Inside Out conceptualizes this of core memories, right? Versus say the memories of what we ate for breakfast yesterday. That's not relevant or important most of the time, so our brain just discards that. I don't need to remember that. But then we have some things that we might remember that happened to us years and years ago, but we can recall it like it was yesterday. But ultimately, when our brains are experiencing a trauma, so a trauma is occurring, your brain and your body are under huge mental load with whatever is happening at the time of the trauma. Your brain is essentially going to shut down your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that deals with organization and logical thinking and helps recall a lot of memories. Your brain is just going to be like, nope, we don't need this. We are not going to direct our energy towards this right now. We are going to direct pretty much all of our energy into more of the primitive parts of our brain that deal with controlling our bodily functions. This is why we have fight, flight, or freeze as a response to trauma, because more or less our brain is going to be in that mode and not in this mode of like, let me take stock and assess this situation. No, we're just going to be responding and reacting. And so that's where all the energy is going to go. That's where the neurons in our brain are going to be firing the most, is just trying to get us out of this unsafe situation in whatever way seems best at the moment. And it's not going to be worrying about the details of what's going on. So it makes a lot of sense from a neurological perspective why memories may be lost of what happened within a trauma, is because your brain is going to be more focused on helping your body do something than on, focusing, on, how do
creating
I want
memories. The hippocampus is sort of not doing great during that whole process. So
yes, that's mostly the memory part of the brain. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. So that's why that one is there. The overly negative thoughts and assumptions about oneself and the world. Again, this kind of ties into what Kate was talking about in the last section. All grocery stores don't feel safe anymore, right? If that's where your trauma occurred. I hear this all the time, which kind of ties into the next one of exaggerated blame of self or others for causing the trauma. It's so, so, so common, regardless of really the kind of trauma or anything like that, that people will often blame themselves of, well, I should have done this differently. And you'll hear this especially when it comes to sexual assault. I shouldn't have worn that. I shouldn't have been drinking so much. We try as human beings to think about, kind of like what you were saying, Kate, because you spoke to this really nicely, of like our brains go to this place of like, well, how do I, what do I,
again?
Yeah, how do I prevent this from happening again? What do I now associate with this traumatic thing that happened? And sometimes our brains may be correct. A lot of times our brains are casting that wide net that you spoke about. We're just thinking about everything, right? And sometimes what we're blaming ourselves for had absolutely nothing to do with the trauma, but we could really get tied into these beliefs. And we think to ourselves, well, if I just don't do that anymore, then this trauma will never happen again. And even if that's true, correlation does not equal causation. I think we've said that phrase on here before. Like, just because you're not doing that thing anymore doesn't mean you're actually preventing a trauma from occurring. Sometimes you can be doing everything that you think you need to do correctly or right, and unfortunately a trauma may still happen because it didn't actually have anything to do with that in the first place, though you thought it did. So having these really negative beliefs about now how safe the world is, or about yourself, and blaming yourself or other people for the cause of the trauma, even if it really was not your fault in any way for what happened, can be really common. When it says negative affect, so much can fall under that. More or less, it just this sounds so flippant. What they're getting at is that you're in a bad mood, but even more so than that, it's like this persistent negative state. So a lot of times this will look like experiencing depression symptoms. That's the way that it can commonly show up. Mentions decreased interest in activities and feeling isolated. That can all be part of depression. And then difficulty experiencing positive affect just essentially means even if you're doing things that typically you would normally enjoy or would make you feel good in some way, now you just don't experience those good feelings anymore. You're doing something that you've always found fun, but now when you do it, it just feels dull and you don't enjoy it. So it's talking about a lot of things here. So now that I've explained those a little bit, there were a couple of things that came up around how DBT can help. Check the facts again felt helpful here. Mostly because of the two pieces there of overly negative thoughts and assumptions about oneself in the world, that piece, and the exaggerated blame of self or others for causing the trauma. If you really check the facts, that might help change some of your thinking around that. Maybe it would help you decrease blaming yourself a little bit. Maybe it would help you realize, building off of Kate's section that she was talking about, maybe it would help you realize, oh, I can go to this place again, or I can do this thing again, and I'll probably be okay. So check the facts feels really important for those things. I also think some radical acceptance can help here, especially with the inability to recall key features of the trauma. It's not that memories don't ever come back. Many people, I think, experience this, that when they do start talking about their trauma, if that's something that happens for them, their brain may start connecting some dots or recalling some of the things that happened at that time that they, couldn't think of off the top of their head. But having a sense of radical acceptance of like, I may not ever have the full picture of what happened here, especially if there were no witnesses. I may never really know all of what happened with this trauma. That certainly takes some radical acceptance. That can be a long time coming. I also think some radical acceptance is going to be needed if, let's say, you do check the facts and you do realize, oh, there was something I could have done differently. Like, because in some cases with some kinds of trauma that may apply. Or, oh, this person really is truly unsafe and I can't be around them anymore. Or, oh, I really can't go back to this place. Like Kate and I were just saying, we do not want you to do anything that is going to be unsafe for you or lead to further trauma somehow. So you may check the facts and feel not so great afterwards, essentially. And that's where radical acceptance may help. I also was thinking about with like the negative affect, aka experiencing depression, less interest in things, feeling isolated, hard time enjoying things again. ABC might be really helpful there, especially the A and the B. I think the B would help too. But that it may be helpful to try to find small, pleasant events where you can get snippets of enjoyment each day. That may be helpful. It's probably going to be a lot of fake it till you make it. If you are just waiting for the day where you will wake up and feel better, it may not happen. So there's probably actually some opposite action here of like, okay, I'm going to do this thing even though I don't think it will really work. I'm going to try to go do this activity again. And I'm gonna try it, say, every day this week. And I'm just gonna see what happens. So it might take getting outside of your comfort zone a little bit, because chances are your comfort zone really shrank after the trauma. What you used to be able to do no problem now feels very, very difficult. That's extremely common. And so this is a way for you to start expanding that comfort zone a little bit to try to get back to some of the things that you used to do in small doses. So the A, especially in ABC, can be helpful in guidance with that. Yeah. Oh, I think we're down to the last chunk. How did that happen?
I know. I think this is going faster than you thought it would.
I think it is too. Crazy enough, I was like, there's so much to say about PTSD. This is going to be a long episode, and I think we're actually going through it at a pretty good clip. But this one has a lot too.
It does have a lot. We'll see. So, the next one is Section E, Chunk E. Ha ha. That's the best one yet. Which they label as alterations in arousal and reactivity. So, They talk about this as basically trauma-related arousal and reactivity that started or at least worsened after the trauma in some of the following ways. So they list irritability or aggression, risky or destructive behavior, there we go, I can say that word right, hypervigilance, heightened startle reaction, difficulty concentrating, and difficulty sleeping. This, not all of this, but I would say that this, if you loop in the re-experiencing, right, with the, especially flashbacks, I would say between flashbacks and this criteria, that makes up a good portion of the, how do I want to put that, socially depicted representations of PTSD, right? If you're going to watch a movie or read a book or do like this is how we show PTSD, right? In media and other things like that. This is sort of the stereotypes a lot of this is, right? So, irritability or aggression, part's probably relatively self-explanatory, right? You just, after this trauma, you're just on edge, right? You're ready. You have the short fuse. This you could think of as maybe your body's hovering awfully close to the fight part of fight or flight. It you know, like, oh, it took us too long to get there last time. We're just waiting at the starting line now.
It's like that anger as protection idea that I think we talked about, like
absolutely.
Emotions 101 stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's ready. It's ready to protect you. Anger, irritability, short fuse, ready. Risky or destructive behavior. This can be, you know, drug use of various sorts. This could be unsafe sexual promiscuity. This could be self-harm in a more direct sense. This could be blowing your life savings. Like this could look like a lot of different things. Blowing up your relationships. Which can come oddly. Also, not can come. How do I want to put that? Is also a form of self-protection, as counterintuitive as that may seem, right? Like, you can't fuck me up, I'm fucking me up, right? Like, there's this, like, just fuck the world, fuck everything, nothing matters anymore, I can do what I want, right? Sort of flippant, I'm flipping over the coffee table of my life, right? Like, fuck everything, including me, apparently, right? So there's a lot of different ways that can look, but just looping it back around to DBT, I would say the riskier destructive behavior, especially if you've gone through more formal DBT training, a lot of these would fall under the quote-unquote problem behaviors category that DBT lists. Hypervigilance. This, personally, is one that I experience a lot, right? Like this can be, you have to know what the noises are in your environment, right? You have to be able to see clearly around you at all times. You're just very alert, but alert to the point of it being problematic, right? Not just like, oh, like you're really aware of your surroundings. No, you're really aware of your surroundings, right? Because who knows, you know, the trauma happened out of nowhere, so you never know where another trauma might come from, so you gotta be on the lookout, right? Since who knows when it could happen again, right? That's sort of what hypervigilance looks like. Heightened startle reaction. That's also probably relatively self-explanatory, and also one that I have in spades. Slight, brief, amusing part of this aside, anytime I put on headphones, if I'm going to do housework or anything like that, and I just tell my husband that I'm going to have my headphones on, so he's probably going to frighten me. So that we both know, because almost certainly he's going to scare the shit out of me accidentally at some point. If I can't hear him, right, if I have my headphones in, and I suddenly become aware of his presence, I'm going to shriek, right? Like, I will have this huge startle response before I can rein myself in and be like, oh, right, husband, safe human, this is okay. Right? So just people who, yeah, you're like, wow, I barely touched you. What was with that response? Yeah, that's heightened startle reaction. And then difficulty concentrating or difficulty sleeping. Again, this all loops into, I think all of these things, all of this criteria is your body trying to be ready in ways it wasn't last time. Right? So it's going to be awfully hard to concentrate on something if your brain and body think that you need to be hypervigilant, right? How can you concentrate on your homework if you need to be constantly aware of your surroundings? right? How can you focus in on your work? How can you focus really on anything that isn't helping keeping you safe, right? Also, sleeping. You're very vulnerable when you sleep, right? There's a reason that one of those, stereotypical Hallmark threats is, I know where you sleep, right? Like, it's one of the times that a human being is the most vulnerable. So if your body's trying really hard to make sure you're not vulnerable anymore, sleeping is going to be difficult as well, right? So all of these things: irritability, aggression, risky or destructive behavior, hypervigilance, heightened startle reaction, difficulty concentrating, and difficulty sleeping. This is all your body trying to be ready because it doesn't think it was ready last time, and or it thinks that if it were ready last time, that trauma wouldn't have happened, which honestly is rarely true. But again, it's your body trying really hard to keep you safe. Jokingly, this criteria, yes for DBT with this one.
Yeah, that's what we were looking at. We're like, for that section, there's a lot of skills that could help.
To an extent, I could almost see you looping in damn near any one of them, if you really tried, including some of the interpersonal stuff, because perhaps unsurprisingly, some of these behaviors can negatively impact your interpersonal relationships. So we're going to go through a few. This is probably not all of them. Right? So stop, right? This one, in a lot of ways, can be helpful, I think, specifically for the irritability or aggression part of this. Maybe to an extent the risky or destructive behavior, right? But if you know that you have a short fuse, if you know that you're prone to blowing up easily or quickly, if you know you're prone to that sort of irritability, stop can help you take those moments to pause between the stimulus and the response, the behavior, right? So stop is just a good way to stop and give yourself a moment and be more deliberate in how you respond to something. So yeah. Tip is just for bringing yourself down a couple of notches, right? If your hypervigilance is over the top for a little while and you need to help calm yourself down. If the risky or destructive behavior you notice is coming from a place of being really activated, right? Really, as they put it, aroused, because arousal doesn't mean sexual arousal in psychology terms. It's more like, it's just your body is on. Up. What'd you say, Michelle?
I said amped up.
Amped up. Yes. Good way of putting it. Right. And so tip, just a good way to bring yourself down a few notches, right? You might be less likely to engage in some of that risky or destructive behavior if you can, right? Bring yourself down just a few notches. This might also actually help bring your body down a few pegs. We'll get to more later for this, but might help you with sleeping a little bit. If you can bring yourself down a few pegs, if you're not in that super heightened response space. Just anything where you need to come down. If your heightened startle reaction is longer lasting, right, rather than being a momentary thing, if it's something that's longer, more drawn out in time, tip could help you bring it down. So tip has a few different applications when it comes to this section. Speaking of interpersonal relationships, give. When you're in this space, no shade being thrown to the people who have the trauma, but there's a decent chance maybe this is doing some harm to some of your interpersonal relationships that you might need to really work on repairing, and strengthening those relationships also so that they can withstand, future incidents that might be difficult, right? So practicing give with the people that you love, with the people near to you, even if it's not loving relationships, just in a way to help solidify those relationships and help repair them when your trauma-related behaviors have perhaps blown them up a little bit. Pros and cons. This one comes back mostly to the risky or destructive behavior, right? If you're able to maybe use tip to bring yourself down a couple of notches so you're in the place where you can think about it, right? Actually doing pros and cons, right? Looking at, I get where this is coming from internally, but does this actually get me what I want? And or in the process of getting me what I want, does it have too high of a cost? right? Even if it is something that I want really badly, what is the cost that I would have to pay for that, and is it worth it? So, if you know that you tend to go towards particular risky or destructive behaviors, you can always do the pros and cons when you're not in the place of having the urge. So it's something you can pull out and use for yourself in the moment. Or, again, you can bring yourself down with tip or something like that, and then do pros and cons, whichever, order of operations is going to work best for you in your particular circumstance. Please is a good one. Though I know we say difficulty sleeping, there's all the other letters. And all those other letters are going to help your body be functioning at its best, right? Which gives you the most resources to be able to heal from or combat some of these behaviors, right? It's going to make sure you have more energy. It's going to make sure you have, just all sorts of different resources, right? To help you. I hate this word, so I don't know why it keeps occurring to me, but I keep wanting to say chill. Like, honestly, someone telling me to chill out is one of the quickest ways to make sure I do nothing of the sort. Yeah. So, not in that way. Not telling you to chill out, but saying it may help you feel more chill in a place that feels good to you, right? Just helping calm that reactivity, helping to soothe and bring down that level of arousal. And last, but in no way, shape, or form least, mindfulness, right? Michelle was doing a lovely job in the intrusive something section. I can't remember. Intrusive thoughts, intrusive somethings. I can't remember what they call it. What's the name of the chunk? Oh, well, whatever.
Yeah, they just said intrusion symptoms.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Intrusion symptoms. Hey, you did a lovely job talking about some of the neuro stuff that goes along with trauma. And mindfulness can directly help to combat that, right? Mindfulness helps to activate your prefrontal cortex, helps to build connections in your prefrontal cortex. So it's, I guess, more buff part of your brain, more able to do its job when it comes to regulating the rest of your brain. It also tends to decrease activity in the limbic system. And the limbic system is going to be the one that's most involved in that hypervigilance and heightened startle reaction. And last but not least, some people are really bothered by that inability to recall key features of the trauma bit. It's not guaranteed, but mindfulness sometimes can help to sort of organize thoughts, and sort of sort out brain connections in a way that help you access more of the full picture of what's going on for you with that trauma, right? So mindfulness, honestly, though, it seems redundant to list it for all of the different sections, really helps with damn near everything related there, right? Because it just shifts the brain in a way that makes it more well-equipped to deal with those traumas and process those traumas after the fact. So, yeah, we did kind of fly. Anything you want to add, Michelle?
I don't think so. I think you did a really nice job with arguably maybe what I would say was the hardest section because there's a lot of different things that fall under that section and then a lot of different skills to go with it. But I thought you did a good job of matching up the skills to the different things.
Thanks.
So yeah, I think you did a nice job.
Okay.
I realized last monthly episode we forgot to give homework. If people like homework and want some direction of like,
whoopsie,
great, listen to your episode. Okay, now what do you want me guys? Now what do you want me to do, you guys? So I mean, this is going to be something where again, not everyone listening to this meets criteria for PTSD or has that diagnosis. So when it comes to kind of homework related to trauma, I would say this. If you have been diagnosed with PTSD by a therapist or another provider in your life, they have confirmed that this is criteria that applies to you, I would really urge you, if you are not already actively working on some of this, if something we said really stood out to you today of like, yes, that's the thing that really gets me. That's the thing that I really experience a lot. Try out one of the skills that we recommended. And if you were listening to this today, and if you're like, ooh, I do experience some of these things, but I've never been diagnosed. I don't know. I view it this way. Diagnosis is not the end all be all, is my stance on things. And also, if there is a part of you that is really curious about, do I actually have PTSD? Is this a diagnosis that applies for me? What can be done if it is? Yeah, this is maybe a conversation to bring up with your therapist if you already have a therapist you're working with, or I would encourage you to try to seek out therapy in the way that's available to you to get some answers on this. If listening to this episode today really got you thinking about like, you know, I did have a traumatic event happen to me. I do experience some of these things. Now what? Would be to be seeking out professional help for that if you're not already. So that's what I would say as homework. If you already have a PTSD diagnosis, start diving into some of this stuff we talked about today. If you don't have a PTSD diagnosis and you're kind of curious, try to start working with a therapist. And I mean, again, not to say that you can't start trying out some of these things, like say the irritability or aggression piece we talked about. If you're like, yeah, ever since that thing happened in my life, I have been a lot more irritable with the people around me. You know, by all means, start applying some of this if you can see areas in your life where it could be helpful for you. But also really seek out a therapist too would be important. Yeah.
Awesome. You do awkward self-promotion this time too. Mwahaha.
Yes, I do get to do awkward self-promotion this time. I feel like for some reason it's been a very long time since I've done it.
It does seem that way, but I don't know why.
But I guess it's because we're only doing monthly episodes.
Probably.
So it's been like 2 months then since I did it in theory. Or maybe I had to do it 2 months in a row. Who knows? But anyways, so to get into awkward self-promotion, we don't have any new patrons this month. Last month we had a bunch. No new patrons this time around. But if you want to become a patron, you can go to patreon.com/dbtandme. Check out our Etsy shop just by going to etsy.com and searching for DBT and me. We've gotten some really cool posts in the Facebook group lately of like people wearing shirts that they've ordered, and it just makes me happy. It just makes me happy when people have gotten stuff from the Etsy shop and been happy with what they've received. So that feels really cool. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts if that's where you listen. Send us emails, dbtandmepodcast@gmail.com, because we love hearing from you guys. And also check out The Couch and the Chair, which is our other podcast where we talk about all kinds of different things that can affect our mental health. And Kate and I do a lot of personal sharing on that podcast about things we're working on in therapy and our own mental health journey. So you can check us out wherever you're listening to us now. You can just also search for The Couch and the Chair and find our second podcast. Wherever you're listening. Okay.
Closing moment.
Closing moment. Jinx.
Nice. Okay. As per usual, start by just finding a comfortable position. This could be sitting, standing, laying down, walking, whatever feels good to your body right now. And if you feel safe and comfortable doing so, I invite you to go ahead and close your eyes. Begin by just focusing in on your breath. You don't have to breathe any more slowly or any more deeply than you are naturally. It's just about tuning in. Just about noticing the sensations and the rhythms of your breath. And letting them welcome you into your body and into the present moment. Today we're going to focus in on having gratitude for our bodies. Our bodies, which are here with us through every moment of our existence. Our bodies that in so many ways function without our help our interference, without any thought or effort on our part. Our bodies, which are constantly talking to us, though some of us may struggle more to listen to what they have to say. I'm going to start today by being grateful for our lungs, for our breath, for our breathing. This rhythm that is there and present through every moment of our lives, that happens usually without any conscious thought, which also helps to let us know things, helps to let us know when we're not calm, whether that be that we're afraid or angry or excited. Our breath can help us know that we're not in that state of calm for whatever reason may be, but which can also be used to help us be more calm if we choose to slow down and lengthen our breath. So just take a moment to remember your lungs, to remember your breathing, and to have gratitude for all of the information that our lungs bring to us, and also all of the nourishing that our breath does for us by oxygenating our blood and keeping us alive. Next, we're going to focus in on being grateful for our heart. Our heart, which circulates all of the blood to all of our body. Our heart, which tells us so much, which can help let us know again when we're not calm. Our heart, which we experience as hurting or aching or breaking when we're in emotional distress. So much information that comes to us through that part of ourselves. And another part which simply functions without us needing to interfere most of the time. From the moment we came into this world to the moment we leave, our heartbeat is with us and informing us of our inside world. So taking a moment to just be grateful for our heart. Next, we're going to move on to our digestive system. This one, I suspect, gets less thought than most of the others. But again, this is a part of us that functions in the background most of the time, but is so necessary and so informative. Right? This is how we take in all of our nutrients. This is vital to us staying alive and functioning. And it talks to us, right? It's this part of us that lets us know when we're hungry or thirsty, so that we will listen to those cues and nourish our bodies and give them what they need to function, right? Get in those calories that help to keep our hearts beating, keep our lungs going, keep our muscles functioning, keep our brains firing. Also, sometimes our digestive system lets us know what we're feeling emotionally. I know many people feel nauseated or a tightness in their stomach when they're anxious or afraid. Right? Maybe we feel tenderness in that part of our bodies, or anger. Right? We'll each be unique here. But probably there's some emotional state where your digestive system helps to cue you in to the fact that that's going on for you in the moment. So taking a moment to just be grateful for our stomach and our whole digestive system. And last but not least, just broadly speaking, being grateful for our senses. However functional any given one of them may be, whichever ones we do or do not have, it is our senses that bring us awareness of our environment. It's through our senses that we have experienced most of the pleasure we have ever experienced in our lives. Everything we may have ever seen that was beautiful or heard that was beautiful, every touch or sensation that we've loved, every good meal we've ever eaten, and every flower we've ever smelled, all of that joy and all of that pleasure has come to us through our senses. And we can harness that ability to use our senses to soothe ourselves when we're in distress, when we're hurting, when we're sad, when we're upset. We can treat our senses in a kind fashion, and they in turn can help us feel better than we were before. So taking a moment, just having gratitude for our senses and all it is that they do for us. Broadly speaking now, I'd love for you to try and sit in a moment of gratitude for your entire body. And also, take a moment and think if there's a way that you could choose to nourish your body today. This could be literal, by choosing to feed it well. This could be more metaphorical, nourishing it by giving it a rest. Nourishing it by treating it to something pleasant. Nourishing it through moving it. Right? You know, if you listen, what your body might need, what nourishment it might be lacking. So see if you can't find a way to nourish your body today, and when you do so, to again bring up this sense of gratitude for all your body has done for you, and all it will continue to do. For now, start to come back into the room. You might rotate your wrist, your ankles, your neck or shoulders, whatever feels good, whatever your body might tell you it needs or wants right now. And whenever you feel ready, you can go ahead and open your eyes. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week,